Okay, today's video is about the Cuff Down Hybrid Universal Sock. It's basically a regular sock without a heel, and it's sometimes referred to as bed socks or a tube sock. Basically, the idea of this is depending on how long you make it, it will fit anyone that you give them to. And the great thing about that, of course, is when you don't know somebody's size, this will be the perfect choice. So what you do with this pattern that I'm presenting today is you create a sock from the cuff down, and I'm going to do 40 rows from the cuff down, and it's one by one. We start with my anchor yarn tail technique, so there's no yarn tail to worry about. It's worked in, and then you just cut off the tail. And the salvage is you work one row of the ribbing with the tappet engaged, and 2 rows of knitting, and then back to ribbing with the heel spring on. Then we take the heel spring off. We work our 1 by 1 ribbed cuff. Then we switch out all of the ribber needles. First ribber needle will be transferred the stitch to the next needle, and the second ribber needle will have a cylinder needle. So the instructions are in the pattern, but basically this is what it looks like. So we take the ribber completely off and then proceed with what's called a mock rib for the length of the leg and foot, because there is no heel. All right, and then when it's time to put the cylinder needles back in, which is what you need to do to make a toe, we hang the neighbor stitch so there's no hole in the transition. Then we work the toe and then finish with some scrap. So this is what this looks like in a quick snapshot. Take that off, there we go. This sock that you see here is a sock with 40 rows on the cuff and only 100 rows and then the toe. Now, just for an idea, as often a question is how many rows should I make this? I mean, it's really your preference. I like to make a substantial cuff on these socks because I feel this is where most of the stay-up power is going to be, and without the heel spring. But if I had a narrow-legged person that I want to ensure that there's enough stay-upness, I might add the heel spring throughout the whole sock or just through the cuff part. But by taking out the actual ribber needles and just switching to mock rib, this allows the segment between the bottom of the cuff to the toe area to be kind of any diameter you kind of need for best fit. So in reference to a regular sock, which is an example here, this would be the foot, and then the heel would be there somewhere, and then that would be the rest of the leg and then the top of the cuff. So if I tried this finished sock when I finished the toe on, it probably would be my lower calf area. Now, if someone else who had a smaller foot, of course, it would go higher up their leg. And of course, someone with a bigger foot, it would go lower on their leg. So it's really how long you want to make it. I've made these bed socks, house socks, universal socks, however we want to call them. I've made them in any variety of rows. I've made them, this is 100 for my machine settings and the fiber I used. This is opal. This worked out as not really as long as you'd think, but as long as a regular sock that I tend to make. But you're really not limited for how many rows. I've made them up to 150 rows, and it really made a really tall sock on me, but when someone with a bigger foot tried it on, it was a little more average for them. And there we go. So what I'll do is I will close the toe from the inside. It's a little bit easier for me. And let's proceed with making our second sock. So as you can see here, the machine is set up in a 1x1, and what that means, just using my scrap, so I'm just going to release some, make some slack, and then use it on the machine. So my machine better aligns with the first slot after the 3 o'clock. That's just this slot right here. This is 3, this is 12, 9, and 6 at my belly button. I always start all of my projects at this first slot after 3 o'clock, and as it works out with my ribber, I've previously aligned it, knowing that this will always be the first ribber needle that I use whenever I'm actually using real ribbing. So this is why this first slot after 3 for me is an empty slot and been set up as a 1x1. So it's 1 cylinder needle, an empty slot, and repeated all the way around. So we want to add the ribber while the machine is on scrap, and this is scrap. So I'm going to always move my yarn carrier to the 7 o'clock position. There we go. Give myself some more scrap slack. All right, so now we're going to add our ribber. To the machine, and we're going to do that. Here we go. So the way the ribber works on the machine is the first thing we always do is we move the tappet to the left so it's contacting our drive pin if you have this style of tappet. And then the second thing we want to do by leaving confirmation that it's to the left is move your dial to the right, always to the right, so that my previously marked first aligned stitch is always going to line up with my mark. So on the inside of my machine, the dial, the fin on the dial, is going to sit on the left-hand side of the part that's right here on the inside of the cylinder. So this is what we're doing here. By always ensuring you have full contact, you can't go backwards. Then when you set up your first stitches, nothing will drift later. It'll make more sense as we go. All right, so in any case, with the ribber on, the tappet to the left, contacting the drive pin, and certainly the dial in the correct orientation with my first marks lining up, we're going to add ribber needles. Certainly there are many ways to add the ribber to your machine. You can simply drop in a bunch of needles and load all of them that way, but then you're not actually working with the ribber needles if you just drop them in. I like to do kind of a hybrid. So what I do is I grab my ribber needle, and what I want to do is I want to kind of lock the dial in place, and to do it so there are no issues with the needle itself. And then you can see the previous yarn bar right there, previous yarn bar. And then what I like to do is just trap that stitch bar with my stitch tool. There it is. This is scrap, so nothing is going to get hurt. And then hook my ribber needle there. And with it hooked, lay it open latch in the slot. Now do that a total of 2 or 3 more times. And by just doing this, this is going to lock it in, the dial. It won't move around. Because the last thing you want is to not have it aligned correctly inside. So now that we are on scrap still and we're adding our ribber needles, it won't move now. It's locked in. Now we can add our ribber needles, and when we add them, we always open latch. So at this point, we can drop them anywhere on the dial in our 1x1 alignment. This is a 72 slot cylinder with an equal 72 slot ribber dial. This is the Pro Series ribber dial, and this is the Chambord CSM AccuKnitter, as you could possibly see right here. We are on the Scrap Pro, so we can add our ribber needles anywhere. We don't care about starting from 3 forward only, so we could do a complete row. Not yet. We just want to basically get the ribbon on and going. So a quick way to do so is just simply do this. But if I was working already on my project yarn, I would want to catch the previous bar on each rubber needle that I add, because we wouldn't want to have any big spaces in the fabric, and we want to start using the rubber needle immediately. So you can just do that. Perfect. Going all the way around. And we are on scrap, so long as we're in the 1 by 1 rubber needle input, then we should be fine. Latch is always open. Okay. And we'll move it forward. So the main goal at this point is just to load the ribber with all the rubber needles. I choose to add the ribber when it's on scrap because it allows you to make sure everything is behaving and aligned. Our CSMs have tons of nuts and bolts, and with using the machine, sometimes the vibration can cause things to loosen. So having kind of a trial first while you're on scrap is not a bad idea. Okay. Now, as I'm still working from this reused scrap, I'm always going to make sure there's some slack. Because if I do not, and I just have it pull from the knitting that I previously did, then what's going to happen is the tension is going to be huge. All right, good. So the ribber appears to be working. Just going to make some more slack. Yeah, perfect. So at this point, we want just to make sure a little bit more slack. Now we're going to stop the yarn carrier at the last slot before 3 o'clock. So it's this cylinder needle right here. We're going to stop. And we're going to stop where that needle, just before that mark, is not all the way down. It's just closed. So we are at the 3 o'clock position, which is a little bit hard to see from this angle, but this is the actual fin for the 3 o'clock. And this needle that's out right now is the first rubber needle after the 3 o'clock position. So this needle right here before the 3 o'clock is closed but not all the way down. So we still can maneuver the needle before 3 o'clock, which is this one right here. We are going to do the anchor yarn tail technique. And the reason why I do this is so I don't have to worry about the yarn tail off the machine later. So I cut my scrap here, and then I use the Quick Start tool I recently featured, which is just a modified super long latch tool where the end has been cut so it can go in the machine top down quite easily. So what we're going to do here is I'm just going to unthread the yarn carrier, move it out of the way without advancing the clamshell in any way. And what I want to do is I want to put the scrap yarn inside the machine. This is the 3 o'clock position right here. And I'm going to take the end of my tool and I'm just going to put it in the tiny space between the ribber and the cylinder, literally just after the 3 o'clock mark, but before the first needle, which is the ribber needle. So just between there, so much easier. I've pushed it through the machine and I'm now holding it underneath. And I'm going to take the scrap and just thread it through. So much faster, so much easier. And now the yarn tail is underneath the machine and out of the way. I like to sometimes add a weight to it, so I'm going to use my clippable clip called a hemostat. So I am just going to clip it and let it hang. There's a bit of weight on it now. And there we go. It's gone right down, just past this needle into the machine. And now we want to introduce our project sock yarn. And it is going to be done in such a way that the yarn tail will be worked in on that first row. The trick here is we want to fold it over, so about the width of your hand, minimum. My fingers don't want to behave. So there we go. And I'm going to put this loop on that needle just before 3 o'clock. Because there's the anchor part. Now it's anchored. Now I'm going to thread 2 ends, which is just the yarn tail folded over. And I'm going to watch it as I proceed to make sure both of those fiber tails, which are folded over, are worked in. All right, so we are on the selvage, and the selvage that we're working on our 1x1 cuff is the very first row. Very first row, we have the heel spring engaged, and what we're going to do is we're going to go 1 complete row. But when we are working with a ribber, a complete row is actually 4 ribber needles before the end of the row. So my end of my row will be right here at 3. So I'm going to stop at my tappet mark or ribber mark. Which is right here, because I know 1, 2, 3, 4 ribber needles before the end of this row. And that's why we're going to stop. And the reason why we do that is the tappet requires a space of 4 ribber needles to turn on or turn off. So the point there is we're going to go around, we're going to stop right here. This currently is in work. We'll turn it out of work. It'll be out of work from here to here, but it's going to finish off the last 4 ribber needles, and then it'll be out of work. It requires a space of time to stop, kind of like a heavy truck in traffic. It can't just stop on a dime. It needs a little bit in order to stop or start. So that's the premise there. This is why we're going to go around and stop at this mark here, which is not a heel mark. This is the 6 o'clock mark, and these are the heel marks. This is the mark for where we stop with our ribber. All right, so I'm just going to proceed, just navigating the yarn tail, making sure it gets caught perfect. With the heel spring on still, we're going to go all the way around, and we're going to stop with the yarn carrier at my mark here. So you can actually see this a little better now. So here's the 3 o'clock position. And so here is 1 ribber needle, 2 ribber needle, 3 ribber needle, 4. So this is why we stop here. Okay, so we'll keep going. Perfect. As part of our selvage, we do 1 complete row of ribbing, and we take it out of work. And then we're going to do 2 rows and stop at the same spot. 1. Stop at the same spot, and we're going to put it back into work, and we still have the heel spring on. We're going to do 1 more row. Perfect. And now I'm going to take the heel spring off. And that's just because by adding the heel spring on the selvage, it makes it tuck a bit better. All right, so now we're going to do 40 rows. So we want to set our yarn row counter to 0, 40 rows. And then we're going to stop the yarn carrier at the 7 o'clock position. Okay, so 40 rows stopping at the 7 o'clock position. The reason why we stop at 7 o'clock, because everything we do from 3 o'clock. And by doing that, you'll see my cylinder rest is ready and able to work. So now that we've done that, we're going to put our cylinder spring, which is very easy to get. You just gently push out one of the cylinder needles. Then you could easily get and maneuver the cylinder spring, put it on the rest. Now what we're going to do from the 3 o'clock onwards, we're going to basically take the ribber off, but we don't drop any stitches. What we're going to do with this is the very first ribber needle, which is this one right here. We're going to put its stitch on the next needle, which is a cylinder needle. To do that, it's very easy. All you do is you kind of get it so you can work on it. And then one way of transferring put the heads together, and with the stitch on the left side of the latch, you just stand it up and it'll pop right over. That's the first ribber needle. Now the second needle, ribber needle, we want to make a bank of 3 cylinder stitches. We're going from a 1x1 to 1x3 block. So for this one, we're going to change it because we need 3 cylinder needles. We're going to do the handshake method. All ribber needles are coming off the machine. So with the handshake method, we put the heads together, keep them tight, tug of war, and using the latch, just transfer it like a little ramp to there. So now we have 1 empty slot, 3 cylinder needles, and now our next ribber needle, which we need to transfer to our neighbor again. So we're going to do that. I'll try to do it from over here. This might be easier. So with the stitch behind the latch, we want to maneuver the heads together. It's a bit of a trick. And now standing it up, it'll transfer, and there you are. It does take a bit of practice, but you can do it. And we're going to move it forward, and we're going to repeat that all the way around. So whether you're transferring the ribber stitch to the next cylinder needle, or whether you're transferring it to a cylinder needle for the slot, all depends on the pattern. We're going from a slot to 3 cylinder needles to a slot to 3 cylinder needles. So again, this next one, stitch behind the latch. There we go. And I'm going to do that all the way around. If you need a close-up on needle transfers or stitch transfers, this is also outlined in my techniques page on my website under the menu My Patterns and Videos. Now on the last ones, there we go. So we've taken care of all the ribber needles, so now we can take the ribber right off the machine. And return your cylinder rest back to the cylinder. Make sure all of your latches are open. If anything is kind of starting to try to close, then just raise the needles just slightly. All right, so generally you can count your rows from where you are, or you can count your rows to 3. It's whatever you do, repeat it. I tend to do it from where I am, so that's okay. So I'm going to put my row counter back to 0 and or 100 rows. So we're going to continue that. And the next point that we stop at, we are going to stop at the 7 o'clock position, which is again over here. All right, so stopping at 7 o'clock. The reason why we always stop at 7 is because we're going to be doing stuff at the 3 o'clock position. So again, we're going to put our cylinder spring on the rest. And now what we're doing here is we're preparing all the empty slots with cylinder needles. All right, and for each cylinder needle that we add, because we're going from mock rib, it's important that you hang one, if not two, definitely just one would work, neighbor stitch. All right, so a neighbor stitch, this is our first needle after 3 o'clock. We want to pick a stitch, either both, on both sides, either the one on my side or the far side or both, and hang it on that newly added needle. I'm going to pick the one on my side, this bar here. And so for every cylinder needle I've added, I'm going to hang the neighbor stitch bar. All right, so then again, this other one that I've done on my side, pick the bar and hang it. And then once again, this guy and hang it. Now we're going to do that all the way around. And you'll notice that we started here and we've done all of these, and now we're back at 3 o'clock. We have to finish these guys, so that's fine. So we're going to continue with the yarn carrier to maybe 12 o'clock. We're going to continue to finish all of them. We want to have one complete row knitted before we add or start the toe. And the reason why we do that is so that, because this edge is, once we finish that row, this edge is going to be the edge that we use to close the toe later. So if all the stitches are actually the same knit stitch versus purl and knit or any funny thing like that, they're much easier to close the toe later. If I was doing a fully ribbed sock, I'd do the same thing. I would always make sure there's one full complete knit row of stitches that'll later become part of the toe edge. Just checking to make sure I've hung all our friends with their neighbors. If you care about symmetry, you would hang both sides because it makes a nice laced thing, but you don't really see it, so it's really your call if you choose to do it or not. One's enough, but two is nicer looking. All right, we're all good. All right, so from here to where we are is kind of half a row. What we're going to do here is we're going to stop at 6 o'clock. And while currently these are not yet the first row knitted, that's okay, because we're going to set up now, because we're at 6, to just lift the needles behind the halfway marks. There we are, needles lifted on the halfway marks. The heel spring is engaged on top. So there's lots of tension there. I'm going to add our downward weight, the sweet spot. Heel fork or V-hook, and it goes right by our heel marks on the inside. There we go. And now that we are prepped for our toe, we're going to finish the row, which now makes a complete row all the way around. And we're prepped starting at just past 12. Always go just past 12. We're ready for our first row of the toe.
The toe decrease.
So with that, we raise one needle on the right and work across. And what we do on the right, we do on the left for this part. There we go. We want to continue working till we get closer to our heel marks. And you're going to watch how the stitches behave, and if they raise, you're going to address that before they raise enough to trap the latch. So these are my heel marks, and for the toe, which is what we're doing, we're going to stop so there's one needle on either side. So we're not going to go right to the marks, we're going to go till there's one needle on either side. So we're going to continue working that. Okay. All right, now if we have a look here, you note that we haven't moved the heel weights. We can do that now, but by putting a finger on the first couple and then on the last couple, you'll generally not need to worry about moving the weights. At least not need to move them that much, which is the other reason why I like this classic idea, the vintage V-hooks, because they really have the 2 points and that's it. So it's one thing to move around versus 3 separate things to move around. So we are at our goal. We are done with the toe decrease. And with what we did, everything till now, what we did on the right, we did on the left. But now it's different for the toe increase. So for the first step that we do now with the yarn carrier on the right, we're going to lower one needle on the right and lower one needle on the left. Now what we're doing here for the method of the increase is we're doing the no wrap method, which means you don't need to maneuver the yarn path in any way. You don't need to wrap needles or any of that kind of thing. But as I recently posted a trick that I found, because what happens now is this yarn path is going to go, it's underneath the latch right now, it's going to come back and go over the latch. So it's very important this latch stays open. So the trick I found is if you come towards it, that latch will open, and sometimes the needle go up and the latch will just kind of slip completely. So when it starts to lift, just push it down. There, I can push it down there. And now by doing that, although you can't see it, the latch is wrapped and it's definitely going to have no issues and it's not going to drop anything. So we're going to continue to the left. Now it's the same thing over here. I'm going to lower that, it's underneath the latch, it comes back, it stands up, and just to make sure it doesn't drop, I'm going to push the needle down a little bit while that latch is open, and it will not drop now. Since discovering this, I have not dropped any heel stitches on the increase. And so what we're going to do here is we're going to continue doing the increase until we're at our halfway mark on the left. So that's going to happen on the left before the right. You don't always have to, but it's a way to guarantee that when that needle goes up, it doesn't misbehave and let things fly. For other really cool techniques, check out my website. There we go, last needle on the left before the 9 o'clock mark. We're going to stop at 6. There we are. Now we're here. Now we lower our last back needles. We're not going to work on them with the sock yarn. We're going to stop at the 3 o'clock position. All latches are open. There we are. Latches are open. Oh, we're going to stop. We're going to cut our project yarn, leaving enough to close the toe later. Feed the sock project yarn inside the machine. Get some very different type of scrap, like something really bright, obvious, no mistakes, or less mistakes anyways. Okay, we're just going to fish this down, put it in that first needle after 3. Latches are all open. And this is where, even though I've done a billion toes, closing them off machine, I prefer to always mark the stitches on either side of the half mark with a stitch marker. Just because when you're closing the toe, there's a lot of tension, and sometimes the edges, they kind of hide. And this is a helper that helps you not lose any stitches when you're working and then find them later when they drop. All right, because I did a complete row, all of them are ready to have stitch markers. All right, good. We are ready to proceed. And so I like to put at least 10 or 15 rows because it's less likely to undo later. All right, now this was my sock number 2, but what I like to do is I like to set it up for the next pair of socks that I'm going to use. And so to do that, for me, I'm going to start with the 1x1 rib once again. So for me, I would probably do the transfers now. So I would stop again at 7. So that, again, the working area, my little tool helper, I would gently bring out a cylinder needle, put the cylinder spring on the rest, and then for me, I would take that first needle after 3 o'clock, which will later be a ribber needle, and transfer the 1x1 setup. This is just setting it up for the next sock later. There we are. So all of ours are now set up. So what I like to do now is I will cut this scrap at the source, and I will go to my less expensive thinner weight. We're going to use this scrap that I used before, and just find the yarn end. There we go. And you can use all kinds of scrap pieces as long as you kind of feed it first or undo it before it goes in the machine. It's easier for the tension. All right, let's do it. So I'm just going to undo it and let it sit. That way you're not fighting the tension of it coming undone from the knitting. See the difference there in the tension? If it comes right from the knitting, it's really tight. So I'm going to undo it and let it sit and then work it on the machine. Look at the difference in the stitches. And this is why it's very important, your yarn source not being fed in from a skein of yarn, a ball of yarn, that it's coming in from a prepared surface, such as a cone or a bobbin. As you can see the huge difference in the tensions. And this is reused yarn or fiber. So what I like to do is I'll just keep going until I feel, here's tight again. That's more than enough. So what I can do now is I can take, and you saw it move, take the weight off, the heel weight. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring my buckle up until I can apply it just to this area here. There you are. So at this point, it's very even, and I can start my sock if I wanted to, but I would start it with the same sock weight fiber. And that is it. I've already started. Let us take off the scrap. Now when you don't add something like ravel cord, which is super slippery, then you kind of have to maneuver, hopefully with a fiber that's easy to see where your sock and where your project yarn is. And what you need to do is be very gentle, because this first row, your selvage row, as you can see, it's a bit of a bump because there's 2 rows of knitting underneath that first row. That's part of the selvage, of locking in the initial row. So find yourself a yarn tail. I actually am more of a fan of ravel cord than I ever was before. And then very carefully cut your scrap, depending on how much risk you want to take, and just pull on it. And of course what happened there is it went into the next row, but that's okay. So find yourself some of that scrap on that first row. I think we'll have better success on this side. There we go. I mean, you could very tenaciously undo it. There we go. Find yourself another pull tail. Try to pull on it. And as you can see, it doesn't like to. And then that comes apart. It's a bit of a fight. Okay.